woman called Bible Lady, okay? She talks here about why she believes that you should save yourself for marriage. Okay, so here we go.
Sex is the most beautiful, sacred thing that God has created, and we are just giving it up like it's nothing. We're glorifying hookup culture to have friends with benefits that you can go do the most sacred act with somebody who literally doesn't care about you.
Well, what's the problem with that? I mean, it sounds quite fun to me. It gets talked up a lot, doesn't it? And she's obviously coming at this from a religious perspective. Okay, so that's what her angle is. But you know, sex gets massively talked up on things like this. I mean, what does she say? It's the most sacred bond thing that human beings can do, and blah blah blah. I mean, not really. I mean, if you've ever been to Wetherspoons in Twickenham, you know, around the back after closing time, you know, people are. I mean, it's not this particularly sacred spiritual thing. People are just doing it, right? And I think it gets kind of overhyped a little bit in that regard. I mean, yes, it is a very special thing. It can be a very special thing between certain people at the right time. Equally, it can also be something that's very casual and enjoyable. And what none of these people, and we're probably looking at Matt Walsh video again inevitably later in this, what none of these people will ever acknowledge is that, you know, there is a pleasurable aspect to this. And people like to do it just because it feels good. And there is a momentary connection. And that has value as well. Right, that also has value. We can't just pretend that that's nothing. It also has its own intrinsic value. Okay, so yeah, I think she's overhyping the wonder of sex in the first place. She's making it seem like a bigger thing than really it need be.
God did create sex to be preserved in the context of marriage. That is the truth, whether people like it or not. And this is a part of Christianity that a lot of people shy away from.
Well, I think God created sex in order to allow procreation, right? I think that's the real reason he created it. I mean, marriage is a man-made thing, right? Isn't it? I mean, marriage is basically, you know, God didn't create marriage; man created marriage. So, why is marriage such an important part of this? I mean, I don't quite get that, to be honest. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page now, sorry. So let's have a look at this, Karen.
Because it's too spiritual for some people. Every time that you are intimate with somebody, your soul binds with theirs, whether you...
Does it? I mean, really? I don't. Yeah, it's a very intimate act. It's the most intimate act you can kind of have with somebody in a way, because it's physically you're close and you're actually inside the other person. I mean, you can't really get much more intimate than that on one level. But equally, it's perfectly possible to have sex and not be intimately emotionally connected with that person, and that can go both ways. I mean, I think, yeah, women in general, they tend to attach more emotion to it, of course. But even then, you know, people can have casual sex and they can enjoy it, and that's not inherently a bad thing, okay? You know, I mean, sex is a very pleasurable thing. People want to enjoy that, they can. You know, I'm a libertarian. I don't really care about shaming people for having a good time, for enjoying, you know, themselves whilst they're on this planet, right? None of us asked to be here. We kind of are here now. We're trying to get through. We're trying to do the best we can. There are things that are pleasurable. Why don't we max out on those, right? Sex is one of those things, okay? So, and also as well, you know, again, she's talking about in these reverent tones as if it's this kind of like, you know, amazing thing, this kind of world-beating thing, when actually really, you know, is she just hyping it up too much? Because, yeah, I mean, sex can be meaningful. It can be this hugely intimate kind of meaningful thing. And equally, it can also be kind of meaningless, and it can just be something that you do for pleasure. And I think what this all comes down to really is a puritanical nature of these commentators, right? Ultimately, these people are Puritans, and they just don't want anybody else to have any fun, okay? And, you know, and then they'll apply this moral stricture to it. As I say, I mean, marriage is man-made. I mean, marriage didn't exist before mankind, and it didn't exist in early mankind either, right? You know, it's a fairly modern phenomenon. So, you know, to say that is somehow a God, you know, it just doesn't really make sense when you think about the history of marriage and you think about when it came about in terms of human history. Anyway.
Want to accept it or not. And when you're intimate with somebody, whatever they got in them is about to come onto you. God isn't withholding good things.
think that was unintentionally funny, wasn't it? She says, whatever they've got in them is going to come onto you. Yeah. I don't know if she meant it like that.
He actually created sex to be one of the most beautiful parts about life.
It's all very, there's a lot of hyperbole here, isn't there? It's all very over the top. Sex is one of the most beautiful parts of life. I mean, yes, it's great. Yes, it's very pleasurable. Yes, it's driven men to create cities and skyscrapers and skyrockets and, you know, all this kind of thing. It's an incredibly powerful, motivating thing. Is it incredibly beautiful? I mean, again, it can be under certain circumstances. It can also be something that is very casual. It can be something that is very kind of throwaway. It can be something that people just do because, you know, they enjoy it and they kind of like each other and they want to scratch that itch. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's going to cause the downfall of Western civilization because people are having casual sex. I think there are far bigger things really for us to worry about, to be quite frank.
Actually so sacred that the enemy has perverted it so hard because he wants to destroy anything that God makes as sacred as sex.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit nuts, isn't it? You know, the enemy. I mean, who is the enemy? She's talking about demons now. She's talking about Lucifer. And, I mean, let's analyze that again.
The enemy has perverted it so hard because he wants to destroy anything that God makes as sacred as sex. Yeah. God doesn't withhold it to be mean to us. He tells us to abstain because it leads to demonic oppression.
Demonic oppression. So basically, sex leads to demonic oppression. I mean, what does that even mean? What is demonic oppression? I mean, I don't even know what that means. I can't even decipher that, to be quite honest. If anybody can tell me what she means by that. But whenever somebody starts using the word demon in an argument, in a discourse, I start to tune out because it's a bit of a batshit thing to say, to be honest. You know, to believe in literal demons, which people out there do. It's pretty crazy. I mean, yeah, there are negative influences in life. There are negative things in life. Okay. The use of the word demon, I think, it's a deliberately weighted word to make this thing seem worse than it actually is. You know, what she's talking about is people having fun and hooking up and having a good time. It's not really the end of the world, right? I mean, that stuff's happening in Miami all summer, all year long. Okay. You know, Miami hasn't fallen. It's still standing. It's still there. People are still getting on with their lives and having a pretty good time. Now, listen, I'm not saying that just loads and loads of non-committal kind of sex without any meaning behind it is a great thing either. Of course, you can overdo anything. You can overdo eating sugar. I certainly do. You can overdo, you know, taking various substances. You can overdo drinking. There's loads of things that you can overdo and it can get you into trouble. But in moderation, like most of these things, actually the reality is sex is not that big of a deal. And she's making it seem like it's the end of the world. And she's talking about demonic oppression. I mean, what the fuck? Jesus. Anyway, let's have a look at this. What she says now.
It leads to demonic soul ties.
Demonic soul ties. What, you mean when you kind of like somebody? You know, you kind of fancy somebody and you guys are hooking up. That's a demonic soul tie. I mean, that's pretty... It's kind of insulting, really, isn't it, to relationships that people may have had when they weren't married. They weren't, you know, they weren't legally married, but there was love there, there was feeling there, there was affection there, there was care for each other there and everything. And she's calling it demonic soul ties. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, so basically what she's saying is that, you know, every girlfriend I've had, it was a demonic soul tie, which is A, crazy, and B, quite frankly, an insult to, you know, those relationships. Because just because somebody hasn't signed on the dotted line legally to get married, that doesn't undermine whatever the nature of that relationship was. And look, of course, what all of these people don't really address is the fact that marriage itself is a hugely bad deal for men in 2024 and, you know, over the last few decades, really. We all know the problems with marriage. For a start, half of all marriages are going to fail anyway. Infidelity is rife. 70% of marriages are finished by the woman. So the guy goes into it maybe with good intentions and then he gets dumped anyway. Then he loses half his assets, he loses the kids, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So marriage is not a good deal for guys, but she's saying that any kind of sexual intercourse that takes place outside of marriage is demonic oppression or you create demonic ties with other people. This is scaremongering. It's nonsense, but it's nonsense that is damaging because it is causing people to, you know, probably get into marriages that maybe they shouldn't, right? And not, as I say, anybody who starts talking about demons on a video is probably nuts, okay? Or at least is using very weighted sort of emotional language in order to create a feeling in the viewer, okay? Because the viewers listening to that go, oh my God, demons, oh my God, sex, it's about demons. And that's making them think, well, shit, now I need to get married, right? Because I don't want demons, I don't want demonic oppression, right? Whatever that means. Fine, that's obviously her message, that's her raison d'etre. But again, then what nobody takes into account, and we talked about this before on the stream when I was talking about Benny Johnson and those guys, what nobody takes into account is the fact that marriage is also a very bad deal and can leave people very, very unhappy and can create a terrible environment for children as well. You know, it's not this default thing whereby you just get married and it's going to be great and everyone's going to be happy. It doesn't work like that,